On the latest Sound Politics, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal stopped by KUOW to talk about the Cal Anderson prayer rally and the city's response, and President Trump's, quote, big, beautiful bill and its future. Listen to Sound Politics on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Bartell Drugs is Seattle's hometown pharmacy.
Every winter, people around here depend on their neighborhood Bartell drugstore for all the
It's been the place to go for everything from almond roca to Xanax for generations of Northwest families. It's been around for more than a century, since before Prohibition, before the invention of flight.
Before online shopping.
At Bartell Drugs, trusted around here since 1890.
But it may not survive its next phase. At least not as the Bartell brand.
Bartell Drugs announces the closure of its downtown Seattle location. It is the 5th Bartell store to close in the Seattle area in less than a year.
The University Village location, which is considered the flagship store, will close. 30 locations in the Seattle area have closed.
This comes after Rite Aid filed for bankruptcy last year, aiming to close more than 150 stores nationwide.
Bartell's current corporate owner, Rite Aid, is going belly up. Now, it looks like CVS is going to buy them out. I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
I'm Joshua McNichols. This is Booming, a podcast about the economic forces shaping our lives here in the Pacific Northwest.
Staying alive isn't just a problem for Seattle's oldest brick-and-mortar pharmacy. CVS, Walgreens, and independent pharmacies everywhere are struggling to stay afloat.
So, what's making pharmacies sick? And is there a cure? That's coming up.
Why does that pharmacist have to be 2.5 feet higher than everybody else? Who the hell is this guy? Clear out, everybody. I'm working with pills up here. I'm taking them from this big bottle, and then I'm going to put them in a little bottle. That's my whole job.
So, Monica, it feels like every time I go into my local drugstore, especially Bartell's, the shelves are getting emptier and emptier. And that's sad because Bartell's was always known for its friendly vibe and it stocked a lot of local products. So what's going on with my local drugstore?
Yeah, well, it's not just Bartell's. Like a lot of pharmacies, Bartell's has been struggling to make enough money, and that's been happening for years. The problem is in-store sales are declining. They're competing with online sellers like Amazon, and people just don't shop that way as much anymore. And then prescriptions in the back of the house, they're also making less money on those. The pandemic made all of this worse, and Bartell's felt like it had to sell to survive. But not even the much larger corporation that bought it, Rite Aid, could fight off these headwinds in the pharmacy industry. So now it's being divided up and sold for parts by bankruptcy court. Enter CVS, which is buying the Bartell's parts. But it isn't likely to keep operating them as Bartell's.
Why is that?
Well, in the past, when CVS has bought up smaller pharmacy chains, it's rebranded them as CVS Pharmacies. There's not a lot of history to indicate that they would keep operating this kind of niche, unique store that is Bartell's. This is part of this bigger struggle in the pharmacy industry right now. Even CVS is closing almost 300 stores across the country, and Walgreens is also planning to close 1,200 stores. Some of those are here in Seattle, and they've already been closed.
That's bad news for my family because after we left Bartell's, we fled to Walgreens.
Well, I hope that you still have a pharmacy to go to, but the truth is that pharmacies, big and small, are fighting this battle on two fronts. One against online retailers and one against the American insurance system. Some are even saying that this traditional way of running a pharmacy might be over forever.
Wow, that's really big, if it's true.
Yeah, so to learn more, I talked with a pharmacist and researcher, Don Downing. He's a clinical professor emeritus at the University of Washington School of Pharmacy, and he's just really passionate about this subject. You can hear it in his voice. I caught up with him to hear more about why the business of pharmacy seems to be failing.
The emergence of a couple forces have caused this situation. Number one, people have purchased things in the front end of pharmacies for many years. Health and beauty aids are commonly called, many other things. And those have helped support the payment to stay in business. But the back of the pharmacy, the professional pharmacy services, have represented maybe 10% of the space, but 80% of the profits for a pharmacy. And the profits have been eroded. Most prescriptions filled today are filled at cost or below cost. And so decreasing income in the front end of the store, maybe from online sales taking over much of that, and squeezing the margins on the prescription drugs. It's very difficult for a pharmacy to operate in that dual threat environment.
So what is happening with prescription drugs? Why are pharmacies getting so much less money for them than they used to?
In a nutshell, there are people in the industry who control what pharmacists pay for the drugs, and they also control what pharmacists are paid when they dispense the drugs. And so they can't control their costs or their margins and sales margins. The middlemen involved in this are commonly referred to as PBMs, or pharmacy benefit managers. They extract discounts from manufacturers that are then shared with the health plans, but they're not shared with the pharmacy or the consumer. Consumers are paying more, but pharmacies are being paid less.
That strikes me as very strange, the idea that we would have a whole company, a pharmacy benefit manager, to act as a middleman, like a sort of arbitrator between the pharmacies and the drug companies. An arbitrator is supposed to make sure that kind of everybody gets something they're looking for, right? I mean, who wins with the pharmacy benefit manager?
Ideally, that's the case, but in this case, I think the PBMs have gotten what they wanted. Health plans themselves are not involved in the business of paying for pharmacy drug claims.
This is insurance companies?
Insurance companies. There are millions and millions of prescriptions every day, and the health plans didn't feel like they had the capacity to manage those, so they hired the middle people, the PBMs, who then would go to a company with a drug A and say, hey, if you want to have your drug on the formulary for a local insurance plan, you need to provide a discount to that health plan, and then they'll make sure that it's preferred drug. And then they'll go to company B and say, your drug could be top dog on the insurance plan if you pay even more of a discount. And so this middle person, without much transparency, keep a certain percentage of the rebates that they give to health plans. And they make a lot of money doing that. And by controlling how much they pay pharmacies, they also keep the health plans from paying the pharmacies too much. But at the risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, the largest PBM in the world is CVS Caremark, which is both a drugstore chain and a PBM and a mail-order pharmacy business. In this moment in time, I think they've been smart. They're a profitable enterprise because they're, as a PBM, they're squeezing and making those dollars. As a mail order, as pharmacies close, people decide to get their medicines through mail order because their local pharmacies closed, and PBMs own 80 to 90% of all the mail order pharmacies in the U.S. So they benefit from that movement of business away from the Main Street USA into warehouses in Texas and somewhere else around the U.S. And so there are benefits to that.
So CVS and the PBM that it owns squeeze pharmacies like Bartell's to the point of having to sell to Rite Aid to stay in business, and then squeeze Rite Aid to the point of filing for bankruptcy twice. And now, of course, we know CVS is going to acquire Bartell's. What do you make of that?
Well, I guess my crystal ball said this was going to happen about 20 years ago. I've worked with Bartell's for many years to try to, and Walgreens and other independent pharmacies and all, to have them take a look at how powerful the current system is and how they might become sustainable practices by doing an end around the PBMs. And because PBMs don't manage clinical care services, what you can get paid for.
So are you saying that you advised Bartell's that they should be doing more like vaccines and healthcare services that aren't controlled by PBMs back in the day?
Well, yes. In fact, Bartell's was the first chain pharmacy in the country to adopt two projects that I happen to be involved in. One is the National Pharmacists as Immunizers program. By doing immunizations in their stores, that's a service that doesn't go through PBMs that could generate revenue and increase the health of the community that they serve. They did the same thing with contraception, with emergency contraception. They became the largest single prescriber of emergency contraception in the state of Washington. And George Bartell said that he wanted to continue to provide a high level of personal attention for patients. But the problem is he was paying a very high price. He was paying out a lot more money than he was bringing in to provide those services. I'll go back to CVS again. I mean, they were smart. They diversified. They bought insurance companies. They bought existing PBMs. They bought mail-order pharmacies. They understood where this was all going, and they decided to provide non-prescription dispensing revenue for their company, staying in the prescription business, but taking a different avenue. And here in Washington State, there are a number of independent pharmacies whose majority of the revenue now is not from filling prescriptions, but from providing clinical services, and I think serve the customers well, patients well. But I think the myth that a Bartell's could exist, that bubble is broken. The economics will not support that.
What do you think needs to happen to make the current pharmacy business model work, if you even believe that's possible?
I don't think the current pharmacy model will continue to work because it's turned prescription drugs into a commodity to the lowest bidder. And so if you're talking about the current model being brick and mortar pharmacies on Main Street, that's very difficult to do. They really need to diversify dramatically. But some are doing this. Some are saying, oh, look, I can provide acute care medicines for people who need it now. And maybe the often refilled chronic disease medicines, maybe the mail orders can manage that. Amazon or some, CVS Caremark could do that mail order. But I'll provide, things that people need urgently, and therefore my inventory is much lower. But I am going to be the community's safety net for pregnancy prevention, for immunizations, for people who have chronic illnesses, whose doctors don't have much time to work with them, coordinating care between multiple doctors. That is a growing way to provide pharmacy care services, and maybe the drugs become a loss leader. I mean, they really are right now anyway. But the other work they do to keep their community healthy and safe brings enough income in to allow them to survive.
So you have this vision where pharmacies become these sort of clinics providing all kinds of care services. They sell a lot less stuff, and maybe the government can step in with some regulation that would help them. But what if none of that happens? What if nothing changes? What road does that lead pharmacies and their customers down?
Well, it's already changed in Washington State. We have the most progressive pharmacy laws in the country. Every pharmacy in the state of Washington could currently enroll all their pharmacists as medical providers in the state of Washington and bill major medical for the clinical care they provide. Only a small percentage have. And I think they're leaving people in the lurch. So I don't believe that's going to continue. It'll become mail order online. And I think there's a role for Amazon and other mail order pharmacies. I think that people who have difficulty finding a local pharmacy because pharmacies have closed or they can't drive or whatever, I mean, they provide value, I think, to patients. But people still need a hand on their shoulder when they have bad news. They still need somebody to share questions that are unanswered and the doctor didn't have any time. They come to the local pharmacist and talk to him. As a former pharmacy owner, I happened all day long. And all those things go away when you have a pharmacy desert. And so I just think the pharmacy business within those stores will look entirely different than it does today. It will not be about filling more and more prescriptions every day. It might even involve getting paid for getting people off of the 20 medicines they're on and getting paid to get them down to the 10 they really need, and coordinating care with the doctors they see, because they can't do that on their own. They need to do it as a team member with all the doctors patients see. That's a reality that is today's reality in Washington State. I spend a lot of time in other states trying to make that possible there, too.
Don Downing is a clinical professor emeritus for the University of Washington School of Pharmacy. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Monica.
Coming up after a quick break, what the loss of Bartell's means to its customers.
So, Monica, Don talked a lot about the business end of pharmacies, why it's getting harder for pharmacists to stay afloat. But what have you heard from customers about how the loss of Bartell's is hitting them?
It feels like a big loss to them. I went down to my local neighborhood Bartell's when this news came out, and I met Owen Selwyn there.
I've been coming to this specific Bartell's, I think, for 20 years. It's sad to see it close. I know I was dubious with the merger.
He said he's mad at Rite Aid and the system that we've been talking about.
For, ruining a pretty great local Seattle business.
This came up a lot in conversations about Bartell's closing. Some people have a really strong emotional attachment to it, and in general to this idea of having a locally owned neighborhood pharmacy. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it used to be a reliable place to get weird local candies that were hard to find in other stores, like Cherry Mountain bars. Have you ever had those?
No, what are they?
Well, they're made in Tacoma, and it's some kind of cherry nougat covered in peanuts and chocolate. My wife grew up with them, and I used to put one in her Christmas stocking every year.
That's nice. So you're not one of those husbands who makes your wife fill her own Christmas stocking?
Actually, on years when I didn't do it, she would put it in her own stocking.
What's the weirdest thing you've ever bought at Bartell's?
Probably a growler of local beer. For a while, my Bartell's had a growler refilling station. I mean, those are everywhere around here, but it's weird that it was in a drugstore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that quirkiness and nonconformist spirit is what people really loved about Bartell's. That's not really my experience. I'm a little bit younger. I'm not from here. To me, the drugstore was always CVS, and so the leap to using online pharmacies doesn't feel emotionally fraught to me. But when I talk to people who are a little bit older, and especially people from here, they're very attached to that model and sad that drugstores today feel so corporate and standardized that they don't necessarily have that warm personal touch.
Yeah.
But Don's idea could potentially bring something like that back with this community health clinic model.
Yeah. That would be exciting.
And I know that it's not possible to do everywhere, but he said that Washington actually has some of the most progressive pharmacy laws and that we totally could create a network of care clinics where these sort of standard everyday services that you don't necessarily need to go to your doctor for are handled by your neighborhood pharmacist.
Kind of like urgent care, but with somebody who knows you better and gives prescriptions?
Yeah. So, this conversation has been a little sad. I think it especially will be for anyone who's attached to Bartell's, but maybe a little spark of hope for what could evolve out of what might be the death of this pharmacy model.
That's it for Booming. Thanks for listening.
If you have a question about the economy that you want us to answer, email us at booming@kuow.org.
And also, special thanks to those of you who are donating to the show. We couldn't do it without you. And if you want to donate, go to kuow.org/booming. Thanks.
Our producers are Lucy Suchek and Alec Cowan. Our editor is Carol Smith. I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
I'm Joshua McNichols.
And we'll see you next time.
Seattle has changed a lot in the last 20 years. So imagine trying to draw the early aughts mostly from memory.
We had digital cameras, but our phones took crappy pictures, and so there's not a ton of documentation online.
On the next episode of Meet Me Here, Gaysian's author Mike Corrado talks about the challenges and the fun of drawing queer life in 2003 Seattle. Listen to Meet Me Here on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.